Welcome to the Arc of Justice on Brookline Interactive Group's Big TV. I'm Eric Hyatt. My guest this week is Amy Takanami. She's a Brookline native, a graduate of Brookline High School and School Within a School. Amy is a social worker and is a member of the board of directors of an organization called Steps to Success. Steps helps students grades 4 through 12 who live in Brookline Housing Authority housing. Amy will share her experiences about growing up in Brookline and how Steps to Success, School Within a School, and other programs informed her political consciousness. Please welcome Amy. Welcome, and thanks for coming on the show. And if you could please just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about growing up in Brookline.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Amy Takanami, she, her, hers. I grew up in Brookline, K through 12, went through the Brookline public school system. I would say, I had a pretty mixed experience growing up in Brookline. Although, not all of it was positive. I wouldn't change it for the world, even if I could, because I met a lot of lifelong friends, teachers, and mentors through growing up here that have made a huge impact on my life that continue to shape actually who I am today. I would say my experience was very much informed by my background as a daughter of working class immigrants, first generation American. A lot of my younger years were spent, just trying to fit in to a predominantly white, known as upper middle class town. I just remember being embarrassed about the food that my mom packed me for lunch, the language that I had to speak at home, our small apartment compared to, other beautiful large homes my friends lived in. But, unlike other elementary school students, you just really want to fit in. And in the context of Brookline, that meant aspiring to this white upper middle class identity and lifestyle, which little did I know back then would probably be impossible for me to obtain in full. But, it wasn't until high school that I really started to feel like difference wasn't the end of the world and that it could actually be a positive thing, an asset, something that could be understood as a strength and an experience and a perspective to bring to the table that others might not have. And this understanding of embracing difference was definitely informed by my participation in spaces like Steps to Success and SWS, which I know we'll talk about later, that really empowered young people and students in various ways. And I think actually Brookline offers a lot of affinity spaces and specialized programs like these that help young people like myself feel empowered, not despite difference, right, but because of difference. And I want to just shout out some of those programs being like METCO, African American Latino Scholars, the ACE program, and more, which is awesome. And I would say at the same time, a question I'm interested in helping to answer long term is how do we ensure the mainstream, the whole school system, every teacher, student, parent in our community has the same tools and skill sets that these awesome programs have to offer so that young people in Brookline across the district and town can feel that same sense of empowerment.
All right. Well, you just gave a lot of really useful and like totally amazing information. So thank you for that splendid introduction, Amy. It's really nice to have you on the show. And I've been hoping to have this conversation with you for a while since we first pretty much met through activism. But I have so much I'd like to learn about your growing up here. Where'd you attend elementary school?
I went to the Florida Rutland Riffley School, which I'm still getting used to saying, but yeah.
Got it. And you said that your parents were immigrants. Did that distinguish you from other kids growing up in some ways growing up here?
Definitely, yeah. Like I mentioned, the food we ate, the language I spoke at home was all very different. And kind of like I shared earlier, any difference is so scary when you're young. You just
Mm.
want to fit in. You just want to be like every other family. So, those things made me feel really self-conscious when I was a young person. But like I shared, growing up, getting older, being in high school, shifted that perspective a little bit.
I'm sorry to hear it was hard in the early part. What would you say was the difference like when you started attending BHS? How did things ease up for you or shift for you a little bit? I mean, high school is a transition for all kids in Brookline. It was for me. It is for everybody. But how was it uniquely different for you? And it sounds like maybe better.
Yeah, I think specifically programs like Steps to Success and SWS gave me the space to allow to embrace my difference. Um, yeah.
So for our viewers who don't really know about, let's start with SWS. That's a program that you and I were both in that is having a lot of a moment right now since it's the 50th anniversary of its creation. And the first graduating class, I believe, was 1971 or 72. So we're right there at that 50th graduating class of SWS. What draw you into SWS? And then what was that program? How did that manifest for you?
Yeah, I would say on and off through kindergarten to eighth grade and in my first year of high school, I felt pretty disconnected from my own education. I was studying for tests, memorizing materials, but not really learning in the way I understand that to be now. And part of that relationship I would say was informed by my immigrant parents growing up, who really pushed an external validations of success, such as test scores and report cards. They were committed to the American dream, but a large part, I would say, is also just the way school is structured, unfortunately, Brookline included, and what measures of success we're using. And I think in addition to my feeling of disconnect from my own education, at that point in my schooling, my first year in high school, I was also looking for, adult mentors, friends, just people in general who could see me as human first and like student second. That was really important to me. I was going through a lot in my first year of high school. I had lost my mom to cancer. My dad was struggling with mental health issues. And to be honest, school was just lower on my priority list than other things. And I needed people who could hold that and acknowledge that and respect that at the time. And to be honest, it was definitely a risk to trust that a space that was sold to me as somewhere where you call your teachers by their first name and you don't have to wear shoes in class is, I think, how SWS was sold to me. But luckily, it ended up being a huge turning point, I would say, in my education, where I really started to see myself as a subject in my own learning. We hold spaces like weekly town meetings where everyone in the community, so both students, teachers, the guidance counselor, the coordinator of the program, gets one vote in how our program runs, including the classes you get to choose. I really just felt like I had ownership in choosing direction of where I would be going in my learning. I got to take classes like feminism and literature, race and identity, individuals and institutions, things that were just like grounded and felt way more connected to my lived experience than anything that was offered, quote unquote, downstairs, is what we would call the mainstream school. And I also met teachers and guidance counselors who really acknowledged my humanity, which is what I was looking for at the time, and saw me in full, not just me as a grade, as my papers, as my exams, but everything else that I brought to that space. And some of those teachers that I had, including our mutual very close friend Abby Erdman, continue to be close friends today. So I think that's just a testament to SWS.
Did someone from SWS come find you? Was there an event? I mean, it's not something like that every student knows about.
I'm I can't remember how I was directly recruited. I will say, for some reason, at least in my time frame that I was at the high school, there was a strong stream of folks from the Florida Ridland Ruffley School into SWS, just like a long history of students from there. So I don't know if that might have been part of it. I just knew a lot of older siblings who had done it. It was already on my mind, even in eighth grade, going into the high school, as something that I should explore.
Wow. Now, when I was back in SWS days, I know I feel like really old saying this, but they only had a few disciplines that you could study. I really just was able to take English, math, and history. Um, I've heard that they've added some new programs since then. They seem to have rolled in some foreign language and some science to SWS program. But was that your experience too? It was pretty much you took some classes in SWS and some in the regular downstairs high school?
Yep, exactly. I don't think I had foreign language up there either. I think there was an option to take just chemistry, I want to say, when I was
Hmm.
there. But it was hard because there was just one teacher and one, you know, point in the schedule where you could take it in the SWS section.
How about in terms of friendships? I didn't ask you about that, but did you make friends differently, like in that program? Like if you look at your friends through high school, did a lot come from the SWS?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the friends, especially the friends that I've stayed connected to, were friends that I made in SWS. And, part of it is the structure that they set up to allow for that. You're in classes with students who are not just in your grade, but it's a mix of grades. It's mixed classes, unleveled. So you're in classes with folks you probably might not have had the chance to be in classes with. You're sharing, papers that are really personal at times, having to do with lived experience. And yeah, I made a lot of connections through classes and being in town meeting and being in other SWS spaces.
I remember the assignment that Abby used to give was to write the paper that only you could write. And I thought that was that's probably of all my life takeaways from SWS, one of the greatest is to think about just what you mentioned, Amy, lived experience and bringing that to the table, not like, not just to emphasize difference for difference's sake, but like to actually like ground our perspective on literature or like a third party topic. To me, like that was one of the big learnings of SWS is that, I live my life as me and I bring to everything my set of perspectives. um, so anything else we want to know about your upbringing in Brookline that before we move on to talking about some of your the professional life and the Steps to Success program, anything else that pops out from our discussion or that you were thinking about being a child of Brookline, so to speak?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, please give our viewers, because we have a lot of diverse viewers for this program, an overview of what is the Steps to Success program, which you and I have both mentioned a few times.
Yeah, so STEPS is a nonprofit here in Brookline. It's a partnership between the public schools of Brookline, the Brookline Housing Authority, and the three of them work together to promote equity for students living in public housing and low-income families in Brookline. The program supports students from 4th grade all the way through college graduation, offering both in-school supports and out-of-school supports, and also residential supports because there's a partnership with the BHA, or Brookline Housing Authority. So we have advisors in 4 elementary schools. Those elementary schools that tend to have the most students and families living in public housing. And then tons of out-of-school supports through after-school homework centers, after-school programming, college visits during school vacations for juniors in high school, paid internships in the summer, access to summer camps, etc.
How about you personally? Did you start with Steps in the 4th grade, like as soon as you were eligible, or did it kick in a little bit later for you?
So I moved into public housing in 9th grade. And so that's when STEPS entered my life. They are amazing at immediately, whenever any new family moves in, setting you up with an advisor who reaches out to you, your parents, making it clear that, they're there for however much you want or need them for. So I definitely use STEPS resources personally, more times in certain points in my life more so than others when I needed them. So for instance, I didn't necessarily attend their weekly homework centers in high school, but they did give me access to my first paid internship, paid job in the summer after my first year of high school, which was at the Brookline Senior Center, which actually, I didn't think I had any interest in working at a senior center, working with elders, but that helped lead me to my first college research assistantship because they were impressed. I didn't just have a part-time job flipping burgers. I had somehow, coming out of high school, I had a experience working at a senior center with elders, which helped me in the anthropology department in my undergrad. So
That's kind of fabulous. I didn't realize that you're the first Steps alumna to come on the show, so I really appreciate it. But it's a really good concrete example of something the program did for you that actually maybe gave you an edge up in life. You said later, like at a competitive school, or if kids are competing for things, you're like, oh yeah, I've already had real work experience. Not that flipping burgers isn't real, but professional work experience related to your field.
yeah, exactly.
Which is pretty amazing. As you stayed in high school, did you kind of remain a part of the STEPS program?
Yep, definitely. And I, was very active even when I was in college. They have an incredible college success initiative program that actually follows students all 4 years through their college experience to ensure students matriculate and graduate. And actually, again, testament to STEPS and how familial they are. After graduating from college with the support of STEPS, I went back to be a college advisor where I worked for 2 years. And now I'm a board member. So my story is not unique at all. There are many alumni actually who come back in many different ways, whether it's volunteer or as staff. They just hired actually their newest in-school STEPS advisor at Pierce Elementary School, who is Deshaun Richardson, who's also an alum of the program. So it's not uncommon to see that.
That's kind of wonderful. Steps to success, it sounds like it's trying to address a lot of issues at once. Would you say like what are the broad categories of issues that they're most able to address? Like, and we're talking about pre-pandemic. We'll talk about during the pandemic a little bit next. But before all of this hit, this massive inequality inspiring pandemic, even before that, we had issues of equity in Brookline that Steps was trying to address. What are some of those issues, and how might they affect kids growing up here?
Absolutely. So I would say broadly, their mission is to close the opportunity gap here in Brookline. So we use that language, right, very explicitly, not just the academic achievement gap, which people tend to focus on, which ends up kind of implicitly blaming the students, right, and the families for not achieving to a certain level. Whereas the opportunity gap kind of acknowledges that, it's systems that have failed our students and families. So we try to kind of fill some of those gaps by giving students and young people access to extracurriculars, things like camping trips, summer camps, college trips, paid internships. And yeah, just because someone's born into access to intergenerational wealth shouldn't be the reason they miss out on these crucial opportunities that we know are the entryway into closing into opportunity.
Opportunity gap is a really great phrase. I'm good. If it's all right, I'll probably steal it and use it going forward. It's a very helpful way to think about things, and I'm pleased that they're addressing it that directly. Are there more like kind of subtle opportunity gaps that exist in Brookline that like around issues of social class maybe that are like harder to read? I mean, STEP sounds like a very direct and upfront organization about its goals. I'm interested in like, you think it's pretty much like done the job, or is there still like more gap to close, is I guess the best way to ask this.
There's definitely more gap to close always. Trying to think of any examples. I mean, I can talk about, some of the pandemic
Yeah,
stuff.
let's talk about the pandemic as a great example of something, not a great anything, but it hit Brookline, and then it came down really, really hard on certain people in our community. It came down really hard on seniors living alone. It came really hard on parents, and it came really hard on kids of all types, but it came down the very hardest of all in the place, obviously, that it was going to always come down, which is on our low-income families. They got hit the hardest, there's no question. Has Steps had to change or modify or do new things to adapt, and what's that been like for you as a board member following this?
Absolutely. So in line with, STEPS' mission, they're really looking at the pandemic through an equity lens by recognizing, like you just said, Eric, that inequities that people are seeing and experiencing and are being exposed to are only just being exposed, right, by the pandemic. They've always existed here in Brookline. I think a tangible example of what STEPS has done during these times is working with food services to make sure families have access to food, even if they aren't physically in school. So initially, food services made food available to everyone for pickup at the high school, which is great. But we noticed in STEPS that our families weren't going to pick them up, even though they needed the food for various reasons. So STEPS stepped in to ensure food was actually delivered at the BHA properties, which really helped with the access problems. Student families were actually going to pick them up because it was coming to their backyards. They didn't need to step out of work or childcare for it. And again, not just food, but during this time, STEPS has also distributed thousands of dollars in direct financial support via gift cards, and not just to our families with young children, but also our struggling college students who are being displaced by universities during this time, who are struggling to make ends meet as well.
So STEPS is actually able to support people, you said, like even young people that are in college, they're still able to receive some benefit through this program.
Yep, exactly.
That's just amazing. So, I mean, as a board, have you guys had to sit down and say, okay, we have to change some of our offerings during the pandemic? And which kind of leads me to my next question, which is, in what ways could our viewers get involved with Steps to Success? What do you need most from us, from the community, and from people who don't know about Steps?
Definitely. So I think there are kind of two ways of getting involved with STEPS. It can mean supporting students directly, or supporting the nonprofit, right, that is doing the support. So it's similar. But in terms of supporting the nonprofit, the biggest thing is donating. stepstosuccessbrookline.org at their website. We are also a volunteer-run board. So volunteering to be on the board or even just serving on a committee. We're really small, so we rely on volunteers in the community. We have a programs and evaluation committee, finance committee, a development committee if you're interested in fundraising or marketing. And then in terms of student support, we do have opportunities for folks to be mentors to high school students or CSI students. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely reach out. We also always have like guest speaker opportunities and career chats where, interns, sorry. So if you're interested in sharing a little bit more about your career path with students who might be interested. And we also are always looking for hosts to host our summer interns. So if you're affiliated with like a nonprofit or a town agency or a small business looking for a summer intern, that's always an opportunity.
Oh, really? So basically, if somebody is watching our show and they're like, oh, I'm a small business owner or I work at a company, we might be able to offer one summer internship. That's one concrete thing they could actually call up Steps and say, yeah, we'd like to offer an internship.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow, that's really useful to know. Thank you, Amy, for sharing that. I totally did not know that. It was as simple as people making an internship available to somebody who might be really able to benefit from that, like you did, and leveraging it into kind of other things. Um, well, I was going to. Is there anything else on the steps topic that I should ask or have forgotten to mention? I guess one thing I should ask is like as we sort of move past the pandemic, and as you said, it's exposed some systemic problems. Do you feel that steps will continue to play an important role, or like ultimately? Should it be like unnecessary a program like that? That's kind of what I wondered. Like, how did you guys viewing toward the future? Like it's going to be around for a long time at this point.
Yeah, of course. We would hope that a program like this wouldn't need to exist because the public schools of Brookline and our housing opportunities could close that gap on their own. But for now, we've seen a real need to have this perspective and advocacy for our students and families. So I see us sticking around at least for this near future. And we're always, excited about the partnership between the public schools and BHA. And I think the stronger that is, the stronger, our support is for our
That,
student families.
well, thank you. That's really like the most detailed description of steps. And, I've been affiliated with the program in a few different ways over the years, but I haven't heard a concrete end-to-end explanation like that. I think that a lot of people will really appreciate knowing that this is happening in our Brookline community. So before, we sort of start a wrap up, is there anything else that I didn't ask you today that you definitely wanted to come on the show and share?
Just one more thing about steps is I think
Please.
in addition to all those ways I just listed to plug in, I think it's really important for folks who want to support steps to spread the word in their networks and communities, just because in Brookline there's so much talent and experience and resources, but unfortunately most people don't see a need in Brookline, right? So they tend to donate their time elsewhere in Boston or surrounding areas when we really could use all the help we can get here at Steps to Success. So if you know folks who are brilliant, donating their time to other nonprofits, let them know that there is need in Brookline and that they would be welcome to donate their time to Steps.
That's a really very good point. I have a good friend who works for the Boston Foundation, and she said, well, there's a perception that there's no need in Brookline because it's a quote unquote wealthy town. And it's very helpful to contextualize it to say, there may be a high median income, but that doesn't mean that every family in Brookline is doing all right or every individual. And so when people think about donating or about donating their time, there are people right here, our neighbors in our own community who are struggling or who have an opportunity gap. People are concerned about equity. This is one place they can maybe focus some effort in this year if they're looking to apply themselves. This seems like a very worthy program. I just want to say thank you for like serving on the board and for coming on and explaining this stuff to us. It's really helpful. Last kind of question. I met you through activism in Brookline around issues of equity and, of course, racial justice. Uh, Would you say you got your sort of origins of your political consciousness in high school? Was SWS a factor? Where did this sort of develop for you?
Hmm. Definitely SWS. I could probably point to a few moments, classes. I think particularly Abby's race and identity class that she taught was a turning point for me. That was the first time I was in a class actually of minority white students, predominantly students of color. I think there was only one white woman in that class, and that was just the first time I'd been in a space like that, and realizing, wow, why is that the case, and why are folks who are drawn to take this specific class folks who look like this in the room. Um, and yeah, SWS really helped me connect kind of my individual lived experience that I thought I was going through alone to these macro, large systemic institutionalized systems like racism, sexism, classism, reading Malcolm X's biography in that class and realizing, oh, there are people who, have been doing this work. And yeah, that was definitely part of my radicalization.
So a homegrown radical in Brookline, back in Brookline, fighting for the cause. That's pretty much like how you've come across, like somebody who got her values in this town, went to college, and came back with a focus to like try to close some of those gaps. You've lived the experience. You've definitely walked the walk. You've been through the STEPS program, SWS program, and any other like programs or things in life that brought you to the moment where you are now?
I'd say one more big thing that came on later when I was working at STEPS as a college advisor in the program that I had gone through, the College to Sex Initiative program. I was advising a caseload of about 40 first gen, low income students of color, grew up in public housing like myself. And they're struggling. A lot of them are on the brink of dropping out because of financial aid, because of these systems. And I'm realizing, I think that position made me realize for the first time, it really isn't the students, right, that are failing. Like, students are totally fine. They're brilliant. They're incredible. They have the passion and the wit and the drive. It's just that these like systems were not set up for that, for us in mind. And I think that's why I was only there for 2 years. I ended up going to grad school after that for macro social work and ed policy and leadership, because we're not going to change. We're not going to We can't just fit people into these unjust systems, right? We really need to change these systems. And I think the higher ed industrial complex is one of those systems that just does such a disservice to our students, sets them up to fail, has always had, upper middle class white cis men in mind. So unless those systems change, like, it's not gonna feel just or right. And I don't wanna be part of a system that just adapts our young people into those unjust systems. I wanna be part of changing them.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for talking about dismantling systems and being specific, and also for your dedication to Brookline. I think that this is going to be a very like special, unique episode of the show. I hope that a lot of people will really relate to what you've shared today. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, Eric, and for running this show through these difficult times. I hope, yeah, people are finding some light and inspiration from your series.